It's my pleasure to introduce my brother in this journey, brother in a lot of things. We've been traveling together for about 7 or 8 years, I think. Actually, I'm losing track. This is bad. Tom is, I first began to know Tom at the '09 conference here in Milwaukee, the International Conference. And there we asked Milwaukeeans, was at the last minute, anybody interested in doing something in Wisconsin? When the meeting is done, gather in the main ballroom. So we did, and what we learned was, and Tom was one of the, what we learned is, we didn't know there was other people that operated this way. We'd like to meet more of them. I didn't think there was anybody else out there. And that began the Wisconsin Servant Leader Movement. All volunteer, no 501c3, no checkbook. Kind of unique. So we have 2,000 or 2,200 people who are on the email list, and every month we have more. But Tom, his seminal, I think on his gravestone, I don't know what they're going to say on your gravestone, Tom, but he started the master's program in servant leadership at Viterbo. And a big chunk of that is go out and serve. That's part of the program. And so he's had CEOs of very large companies in Wisconsin who are servant-led. Over 200 graduates. That's just phenomenal. There isn't a day that goes by that Tom doesn't do something for the least privileged in our society, those disadvantaged folks. Here you are, Tom. You got to limit your time, you know.
Nothing better than being introduced by a friend. What do you do when you're lost in the forest? Stand still. The tree ahead of you and the bush beside you are not lost. The place you are is called here. Here. You must know it and be known by it. Listen, the forest speaks. It says, I have created everything around you, and should you ever return, you may always come calling, here, here. No two trees are the same to raven, no two branches the same to wren. But what if the tree and the branch dust is lost on you? Then surely you are lost. Stand still. Let the forest find you. The place you are is called here. Here. And where's the most difficult place for all of us to live? Here. Because we're worried about what we didn't get done this morning and then what's going to happen later tonight. The number one temptation of every leader today is distraction. Being pulled apart. And what is it that everybody wants from us instead? Is our attention. Please be present to me. Please give me an opportunity to speak. Please help me to understand that you listen about what's important to who I am and what I believe. This last November, I was in San Diego at an international conference on contemplative studies. I was scheduled for the last morning of the project, and my topic was servant leadership as a contemplative process. As I was beginning my presentation, a gentleman comes up, and he said, hello, Tom. I'm Newcomb Greenleaf, Robert's son. Robert's son, Newcomb, comes up, and he said, I had no idea that people were taking my father's ideas this seriously. And I began to speak, because what we have always tried to do is be true to the vision of Greenleaf. Not to make this popular, but to make this purposeful. And then afterwards he came up with tears in his eyes and thanked us. And I told us about these groups, these conversations, that his father's ideas were seminal and we're trying to grow them and develop. Now after I get up speaking, chief engineer of Google gets up. Shows one slide. And it's a room half this size with engineers from Google lying on the floor meditating. They've introduced meditation at Google. And he said this, in 1 year, we have increased civility by 31% and psychological safety by 28%. Why is that important? Because I work with computer engineers, and if they do not feel psychologically safe, if they do not feel that the conversations are civil, they are not able to be innovative. Isn't that true in all of our organizations? The levels of stress that get compounded. The level in terms of busyness and distraction. So one of the first quotes I have from you is from, thank you for being late. In his sobering book, Sabbath, the minister and author Wayne Mueller observes how often people say to him, I'm so busy. We say this to one another with no small degree of pride, as if our exhaustion were a trophy, our ability to withstand stress a mark of real character. To be unavailable to our friends and family, unable to find time for the sunset, or even to know when the sun has set at all. To whiz through our obligations without time for a single mindful breath. This has become the model of successful life. And it's absolute foolishness. Thomas Friedman, in his new book called Thank You for Being Late. He's a columnist for New York Times, and is writing his books. He meets people for breakfast. And over the last 10 years, he's recognized how people are showing up 15 to 20 minutes late, and people come in frantic. Oh, I'm sorry, the traffic this morning. I wasn't able to get my train. Something happened at home. And he'd smile and he'd say, thank you for being late. And people look at him quizzically. He said, no, thank you for being late. You just gave me 15 minutes for reflection that I wouldn't have had today. And then he began to reflect on this. If I have so little time for reflection, I bet that same thing is happening to other people as well. And he finds out that all of us have very little time for reflection. When's the last time that you as a leader had a complete 2 hours to yourself just so you were able to think about the decisions that you were going to make that are going to have impact not only in the next 6 months, but maybe for the next 6 years? And he began to look at the accelerating rate of change that's taking place in our culture. And he has this marvelous metaphor for self-awareness. He says, we all need to develop the ability to live in the eye of the hurricane. What's at the eye of the hurricane? Calm, quiet, stillness. And when you enter into this calm and quiet and stillness, all kinds of things are revealed. All kinds of things about ourselves. Daniel Goleman writes that the three main characteristics of an effective leader: self-management, self-awareness, and empathy. Warren Bennis, one of the great writers on leadership, says this: the task of leadership is the emergence of the authentic self. Matthew, very early on, you saw a man who would say one thing and acted another. That level of inauthenticity destroyed any level of trust. To come home to ourselves and be the same person at home as I am at work. This is who I am. I can be no other. This is what Bill George talks about as the true north. But you've all experienced this in your life as well. Now, I can give you all kinds of theory, I can give you all kinds of statistics, I can tell you about the leaders that I'm working with, but nothing captures the idea of self-awareness more powerfully than stories. 4 quick stories. 1. The students came to the master and said, Master, Master, what can we do to become enlightened? And the master said, nothing. You cannot do anything more to become enlightened than you can make the sun to rise. Then, Master, why do you teach us all of these spiritual disciplines? He said, so that you're awake when the sun rises. That's self-awareness. Being fully awake. What are the disciplines that you're practicing in your life right now that are heightening your levels of awareness? What are the things that you're doing on a regular basis that are deepening your own internal self? What is the things that are helping to feed your imagination, your intuition, your common sense? What is it that you are doing on a regular basis so that you are able to embrace the pain of people who suffer in your organization? That's why Greenleaf says that self-awareness is not only an awakener, it's a disturber. As a leader, what are the questions that wake you up at 3 o'clock in the morning and won't let you get back to sleep? And who do you talk about that stuff with? Really significant. Second story, it's one of purpose. I grew up in Wisconsin Rapids. I was born here in Milwaukee, not far from here at St. Joseph's. My grandmother had her beauty shop on 51st and Center, so always coming to Milwaukee, being with all of you, feels in many ways like coming home. And when I was growing up, my mother suffered from postpartum depression. It was difficult. Remember back in the 1960s, we didn't talk about mental illness. We don't talk about it today. Could you imagine what it was like in the 1960s? My father's an attorney with 6 small children. His wife does not come home from the hospital. In fact, she's in a psychiatric unit. I went all through high school and nobody even asked me about my mother. And you think about it per day, how often do we walk by the pain of other people rather than asking, how are you really doing, Jason? How's your family? How well do we know the struggles of each other? How aware am I of the burdens that other people carry? Folks, people who say that is soft stuff are people who are afraid of it. It's the hard stuff. So, we got placed in homes. Not foster homes. Other people, families just took us in. And this is my first moment of awakening. I'm 12 years of age. I'm laying in the bed of a family I do not know, looking up at the stars and asking the question, God, why my family? Why my mother? When are we going to get back together? And in the quiet that night, I felt the power of love wash over me. I've never doubted the power of prayer. Second, I asked my father, who's taking care of mom? He says, a psychologist and psychiatrist. I said, what do you have to do to become a psychologist and psychiatrist? He said, you have to go on to college and get a degree in psychology. And so I did. At 12 years of age, my life was set in motion by prayer and service. That's my purpose. When I'm lost, I always come back to, am I praying? Am I serving? Everybody has a story. In moments of reflection, you have to go back and embrace what you want to deny. Every leader casts a shadow in the organization in which they're in. Does that shadow bring darkness or light? And what you said so very clearly is one of darkness. What you said so very clearly is one of light. Third story. Jean Vanier, who's my spiritual mentor, he's from Canada, now living in France, received the Templeton Award for his contributions to humanity a couple years ago. He's 89 years of age. An extraordinary gentleman. You want to look for somebody who writes with wisdom, Jean Vanier. And he's walking through the house one night that we're living with people with disabilities, and a young man is sitting there and he's just crying. And Vanier sits down next to this young man and said, what's wrong? He said, I came here to serve people and to help them. But today I was working with a man who was autistic. And by the end of the day, I was so frustrated that I just wanted to take a pillow and put it over his face. I must leave. That man does not need that kind of rejection. Vanier listens to the young man. Young man's sobbing. And Vanier says, no, you must stay. You must stay. The gospel doesn't say, blessed are those who work with the poor. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Today's your day of redemption. You've touched your own poverty. All of servant leadership, why self-awareness is so terribly hard, is because it makes us humble. Humble before the facts of our life. These are the things that I proclaim. This is how I live. There's a gap. These are the ways in which I've disappointed other people. These are the levels of regret that I need to embrace. These are the times when I could have done better. To embrace our own humanity is to embrace our own humility. And self-awareness, moments of silence, breaks through. And we cannot deny them. And finally, my own father, the greatest servant leader in my life. One of the things, for those of you who are younger, it's just amazing. After you turn to 60, 65, all of a sudden you become much more focused on the early part of your life, the first 10 years of your life. I heard one guy say, all of our lives are like a Dickens novel. All the past characters and past plots kind of reveal themselves in the last couple of chapters. And so what happens in terms of self-awareness, when you spend time in contemplation, you begin to recognize how you've been formed. You become who you always were. So one night my brother and I are with my father. We had a men's group and we're sharing. I asked my father, what did you want to teach us about being men? And my father smiled and he said this: I've made mistakes. And in my mistakes, I've hurt you, members of our family, and others. And I knew that you would make some of the same mistakes. So I tried to teach you to be gentle and kind and polite, so that when you made mistakes, people would find it a little easier to forgive you. And that moment of awareness has become foundational. Because as a leader, as a teacher, as a husband, father, and now grandfather, I've made mistakes and I will continue to make mistakes. So I try to be gentle and kind and polite in all my interactions so that when I do make mistakes, you might be able to forgive me. Talk about corporate culture, talk about community. The foundations of every culture and every community are forgiveness and celebration. Because all of our organizations are human, therefore we are all frail. All frail. So we need to be able to embrace our mistakes, to speak the truth with love, and we need to be able to celebrate the goodness that we experience and the work that we do with each other. Good work, hard work, noble work, our work. So the man from Google spoke, the last person who spoke at that conference, Emory School of Medicine. And on the board they wrote the number 365. And they said to the group of professionals like ourselves gathered here, what does it stand for? And of course everybody said, days of the year. And they said yes, but unfortunately 365 is the number of medical residents who committed suicide last year in this country. The best and the brightest of us who have hearts filled with service finding themselves in the midst of despair. Self-awareness, those of us who are older must dedicate ourselves to encouraging the next generation and each other. We must invite others into the eye of the hurricane where they can experience calm, serenity, and peace in our presence.
Thank you, Tom.